Good morning. Thank you for being here. Bonjour tout le monde. Before I begin, I would like to recognize that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. I pay respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect today and every day to all other Indigenous people present here today. I would like to thank the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business for being here with us today. It has been an honor to work with Tabatha Bull during the pandemic. Her crucial skills and knowledge contributed greatly to the work of the COVID-19 Supply Council and our ongoing discussions at Public Services and Procurement Canada. Through collaboration with a diverse group of private and non-private sector leaders, the Council provided valuable expertise on supply chains, procurement of critical goods and supplies, shipping, and distribution. Tabatha, among many other First Nations, Inuit, and Métis business leaders, has also been instrumental in bringing us to this announcement here today. Indigenous-owned and led businesses have played a significant part in Canada's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. In response to the pandemic, PSPC awarded 38 contracts to 30 self-identified Indigenous businesses, collectively worth more than $126 million, including for logistics and IT professional services, medical and laboratory supplies, as well as masks, hand sanitizer, and thermometers. Our commitment to providing inclusive economic opportunities will not end when the pandemic does, particularly for Indigenous peoples across this country who should be included in Canada's procurement supply chains in a more deliberate way. Le gouvernement du Canada est l'un des plus importants acheteurs publics de biens et de services. Nous avons donc un grand rôle à jouer à cet égard. Nous sommes déterminés à orienter notre pouvoir d'achat considérable vers un éventail plus diversifié de fournisseurs. Il s'agit notamment de créer des occasions d'affaires pour les entreprises dirigées et gérées par des peuples autochtones, même en cette période de crise. Aujourd'hui, en compagnie de Pam Damoff, secrétaire parlementaire du ministre des Services et Autochtones, j'ai le plaisir d'annoncer que notre gouvernement prend des mesures concrètes pour offrir aux entreprises autochtones davantage de possibilités dans le cadre des marchés publics fédéraux. My colleagues and I have met with Indigenous business leaders a number of times over the past year, pandemic or not. We have listened to what these leaders have requested, and we have heard them. As such, I am pleased to announce that we are moving forward in implementing a mandatory requirement for all federal departments and agencies to ensure that a minimum of 5% of the value of their contracts are held by businesses managed and led by First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. The new requirement will be phased in, with full implementation expected by 2024 and mandatory public reporting of progress against that target. To be clear, 5% is the floor, not the ceiling, when it comes to ensuring that Indigenous-owned and led businesses are full partners in government contracting. To support progress towards this 5% requirement, Indigenous Services Canada will make significant investments in the amount of $35.2 million over 5 years to enhance and modernize the government's procurement strategy for Aboriginal business, which Pam Damoff will speak to very shortly. Nous prévoyons que le soutien annoncé aujourd'hui se traduira par l'attribution de contrats gouvernementaux d'une valeur d'environ $1 milliard à des entreprises autochtones chaque année. Dans le cadre de la stratégie d'approvisionnement auprès des entreprises autochtones, notre gouvernement continuera également de travailler en étroite collaboration avec ses partenaires autochtones pour faire de cet objectif une réalité. En plus d'accorder du financement aux partenaires des Premières Nations, des Inuits et des Métis pour accroître la capacité des entreprises autochtones à soumissionner des contrats fédéraux. While noting that government procurement aggregate contract values vary year over year, we anticipate that the initiatives announced today will result in approximately $1 billion worth of government contracts going to Indigenous businesses every year. Through the procurement strategy that we are announcing today, the government will continue to work closely with Indigenous partners, as well as providing First Nations, Inuit, and Métis partners with the funding to ensure that Indigenous businesses are competing for federal contracts on a level playing field. PSPC, through Procurement Assistance Canada, formerly known as the Office of Small and Medium Enterprises, or OSME, will continue to support the participation of Indigenous businesses across Canada in federal procurement by delivering educational support and providing any other assistance. And I want to say on a very personal level that I am committed to making sure that there are more opportunities for Indigenous businesses to succeed and grow. That has been the subject of our conversation over the past year across government, inside and out, and I am very pleased to be here today to reaffirm that commitment in a very tangible way. Indeed, our goal is to create a more equitable and inclusive society, a stronger Canada for everyone, where everyone is respected and where everyone can thrive. Today's announcement regarding opportunities for Indigenous managed and led businesses is one important step in that direction. I will now turn it over to my colleague and friend, Parliamentary Secretary Pam Damoff. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Well, thank you, Anita, and good morning. I too would like to begin by acknowledging that we're on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I'm happy to be here today with two of my favorite people and two women who just know how to get things done. My colleague, Minister Anita Anand, and one of our partners, Tabatha Bull, President and CEO of the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business. It's a pleasure to be here with you both today. The input from the Indigenous Reference Group, which includes members such as the CCAB and the National Aboriginal Capital Corporations Association, among others, has been critical to this work. This group was established to advise the government on an Indigenous-informed approach to the mandatory target of at least 5% procurement from Indigenous businesses. Their input has been essential for creating transformational change in Indigenous communities. The much-needed policy changes and funding that have been announced today will provide a boost for Indigenous enterprises across the country. We know, and those working within the Indigenous economy know, there is an underrepresentation of Indigenous businesses in the federal procurement process. These new changes will help businesses compete for federal contracts. To support the mandatory government-wide procurement target of at least 5%, the procurement strategy for Aboriginal businesses will be modernized. First of all, by changing the name to the Procurement Strategy for Indigenous Business to be more reflective and inclusive. In addition to that, we'll be broadening the geographical areas where federal organizations must first consider procuring with Indigenous businesses and organizations. Furthermore, we've heard the current procurement model is outdated, and that's why we're working to remove barriers that restrict growing Indigenous businesses. Recognizing the talent, innovation, and potential of Indigenous businesses by opening up the procurement process is part of a larger overall effort to close the economic gaps between Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous people in Canada. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted these socioeconomic gaps. It has caused intense economic strain and uncertainty. In recognition of this, the funding today builds on investment that we committed to as part of Budget 2021. We provided economic support to Indigenous businesses and communities, such as an additional $117 million to the Indigenous Community Business Fund. We also provided funding to Indigenous women business owners to ensure they are supported. In the spring, I hosted a roundtable of Indigenous women entrepreneurs to discuss some of the challenges they faced over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic and in establishing and maintaining their businesses in a changed world. Back in February 2020, my very first meeting as a parliamentary secretary was with Tabatha Bull, and we discussed the challenges Indigenous businesses face during the procurement process. With over $35 million announced today, Indigenous Services Canada will work with Minister Anand's team to implement the policy, engage with partners, add Indigenous businesses to the directory, track mandatory reporting, and work to close that gap that I've heard from so many Indigenous businesses. It's imperative that we foster and encourage opportunities for Indigenous businesses so they can flourish and continue to be the cornerstones of their communities, like some of the women I met during the roundtable. And it is part of this government's efforts towards advancing economic reconciliation with Indigenous communities as it promotes healthy, vibrant, and prosperous communities. Our government is working towards a sustainable green economy that is inclusive of Indigenous peoples, especially Indigenous women and underrepresented groups, and lifts them up. So I applaud the changes that Minister Anand announced today and extend my sincere gratitude to all involved with this work. Together, we will make the economy more open and accessible to Indigenous peoples in order to advance economic reconciliation. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Ani, Tabatha Bull, Indigenous, Nipissing, Indigenaba, Midjasido Dem. Hello, my name is Tabatha Bull. I am from Nipissing First Nation and have family roots and many loved family members at Serpent River First Nation. I'd like to thank both of you for acknowledging the traditional territory that we stand on today. As President and CEO of Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business, I am so proud to stand here today as part of this announcement. I'm incredibly proud of the work that CCAB has been doing on Indigenous procurement over the last number of years. Only a month after I joined CCAB in 2018, JP Gladue, Randy Moore, our co-chair, and Mark Little, the then COO of Suncor, and I spent a day in Ottawa meeting with various ministries, speaking of the need to increase Indigenous procurement from the Government of Canada and many of the measures needed to get there. In spring of 2019, CCAB released a report titled Industry and Inclusion, an Analysis of Indigenous Potential in Federal Supply Chains. It demonstrated that Indigenous businesses in Canada could supply 24% of the federal supply chain. From our research to our supply chain initiative with Corporate Canada, our direct support of Indigenous businesses in accessing and landing contracts, to our relentless work in meeting with government and the incredible opportunities we have been provided over the last 18 months to present to Senate and House standing committees, our message has been consistent and our team persistent. Not only do I feel pride, I feel we have accomplished something remarkable together. Something that has the potential to support generations of Indigenous businesses and communities. To not only close the social economic gaps, but to regenerate the wealth that has been lost and to move us towards Indigenous prosperity. This has not been done by us alone. There are numerous Indigenous leaders, business owners, non-Indigenous businesses who have advocated for change before me, who continue to use their voice and who prove every day the value of Indigenous procurement. But as much as we all can raise our voices, we need partners. And I want to thank both of you, Minister Anand and Parliamentary Secretary Damoff, and to Minister Miller, who is not here today, for not only listening, but for hearing us, and to your teams who have worked closely with us through the Indigenous Procurement Working Group over the last year. As you said, Parliamentary Secretary Damoff, we met just before we entered this pandemic and just before I took the lead of CCAB. You have continued to inquire about Indigenous businesses, and I know you have been a strong advocate. So Chimagwech to both of you. Lastly, I feel a great deal of responsibility to continue to work alongside government, Indigenous business, and Indigenous leaders as part of the Indigenous Procurement Working Group to ensure that the measures announced today are not only met, but surpassed. I wish our Director of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, Philip Ducharme, could be here today. He has championed Indigenous procurement within CCAB and throughout his extensive career, working with Indigenous business and federal procurement and many organizations. At his recent appearance at the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, he said that he has never had the opportunity of collaborating as closely with federal departments, in particular with federal procurement, through the Office of Small and Medium Enterprise as we have in the last year. Together with various OSME regions, we've held numerous information webinars for Indigenous businesses, and we will continue to do so. This collaboration helps Indigenous business navigate the complexities of responding to federal procurement, and one of the ways we continue to work with the federal government to support the mandate of achieving a minimum of 5% Indigenous procurement target. This is the progress that we've been striving for. And through continued collaboration, we can ensure that these measures have the lasting impact that ensures both the Indigenous economy and that of all of Canada prospers. Chimagwech. And now I believe we will open for questions. I would ask the moderator to please explain the process.
Certainly. We'll now take questions from the telephone lines. Please press star 1 if you have a question. Nous allons prendre les questions au téléphone. Si vous avez une question, s'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1. Once again, you may press star 1 if you have a question. De nouveau, vous pouvez appuyer sur étoile 1 si vous avez une question. There are no questions registered at this time. Nous n'avons pas de questions pour le moment. I would like to turn the meeting back over to the room.